Today we're going to be discussing one of my favorite horror movies of all time, one of my favorite movies of all time, and I feel like I say this ad nauseum, but that's why I pick these movies, and specifically today we are going to discuss William Friedkin's The Exorcist.
You probably know as much about possession as most priests. Look, your daughter doesn't say she's a demon, she says she's the devil himself.
My father, when he was younger, he said he went and saw this with his friends. When he came home, a crucifix fell off the wall, and this film has developed a lot of lore and a lot of stuff like that over the years. Nowadays, a lot of people who watch this for the first time say it's not that scary, and when I think about this movie, it's not the scares, it's really not the horror that attracts me to it, it's the story. This is a very well done movie. When you take the horror aspect out of it, the acting, the writing, the cinematography, the music. The story itself is a very classic good versus evil battle set in the city around Washington, D.C., following this famous actress and her daughter who suddenly comes down with something. And it's not a straightforward horror movie. Like I said, it's elevated above that. You have nuances, you have character subplots that really create depth within these people. You have Father Damien Karras, who's dealing with his mother who's sick. You have his own internal conflicts. You have Regan, who, wonderfully played by Linda Blair, by the way, and we will get into that, who is living with her mother, Chris McNeil, but obviously there's an issue where the father's not present. He doesn't care. So you have that dynamic. You have Father Merrin, where it opens up in the beginning, and he's in Iraq, and his spiritual battle against the forces of evil. So a lot of times this film is remembered as a horror film, as a shocker, and it is, trust me. But it really, at its core, is a battle between good and evil, and good's triumph over evil, and I love that. And as I stated in my first video, that I am a Christian, so sometimes the horror genre goes against my beliefs in a way, but I always look for that good versus evil battle and the light triumphing over darkness, and boy does it ever in this movie. You know, we open up and we're in the Iraq setting, and it really set the tone there with the strange visuals, this seeping dread, this almost like ancient, which it is, this ancient evil which is starting to permeate into the story. And you obviously have the figurine, the little artifact that they find, and somehow that crosses into the film later. But once we get into DC, you know, we really, or I guess the area around DC, Georgetown, we meet Chris McNeil and we meet her daughter, and obviously Ellen Bernstein destroys this role in a good way. She is just fantastic, and she really is one of my favorite actresses of all time, and this film truly showcases her range and her talent.
So what's wrong with her?
We still think the temporal lobe.
Oh, what are you talking about, for Christ's sakes? Did you see her or not? She's acting like she's fucking out of her mind, psychotic, like a split personality or...
You know, we're introduced to her character, and she's a famous actress, she's pretty wealthy, but she loves her daughter, and she loves her job, and she loves and takes care of the people around her, whether it is her butler, her assistant, her film crew. She just seems like she's really loved and respected and has her life together in a sense, aside from raising her daughter alone and not having a partner and a father ex-husband that she has a lot of animosity towards. And we see that in some scenes when it's Reagan's birthday and she's on the phone with him yelling, and it's just, you know, really intense. It's those scenes that matter and those scenes that build the characters here. So obviously her world gets turned upside down once Reagan is possessed, and you have the whole sequences of her going to the hospital and meeting with this board of doctors, and they just can't figure out what's going on with her. And it's just becoming more dreadful because you're starting to realize at some point that maybe this isn't a physical ailment. And I mean, as we know that as the audience, because they do set that up in the beginning, but as far as Chris goes, the mother, the dread for her starts to build because the doctors truly have no answers. And they come across as they do care, but they do not have answers. And one of my favorite scenes is when they realize that and they ask her if she's a religious person. This detective that comes in and out of the film, and he is introduced once Burke is thrown. You also have this detective that comes in throughout the movie. Really interesting character, and he's established once the death of Burke happens that really destroys Chris's world, because I think there's a subtext that they were having a relationship. He's the director of the movie she's working on. And during Reagan's descent into madness, Chris comes home one night and she's told that he was found dead. He was drunk. He fell down the stairs around the block. This really nasty flight of stairs that comes back later. And she's distraught because I think she knows that Reagan potentially did it once the detective shows up to her house. And he's cordial, he's kind, he's kind of annoying, but I think that's his character. And he's convinced that it wasn't an accident, that someone threw him from her daughter's room, and he doesn't know why and how that could be possible if anybody had gone up there. And you see in her eyes and her acting that she knows it's the daughter, especially with not her daughter, but what's within her daughter. So now she's not only dealing with the health and potential death and demise of her lovely daughter, she's also dealing with the fact that there's legal issues here involved, that her daughter, or the demon within her daughter, maybe the devil, threw him out the window and killed him. And she mentions this to Father Karras later on, once they're deep within, ready to go for the exorcism, or at least when he was being investigating Reagan to get to the point of an exorcism. So yeah, you have this detective, and he's kind of in and out of the movie, and he builds a relationship with Father Karras, and he's a funny guy. He likes movies, and another really well-written, authentic, unique person that you would find in everyday life. And he comes off across as a detective, an annoying one, but that's their job. From their point of view, it's an attempt at a placebo effect where maybe the power of suggestion through going to an exorcist or having an exorcism done will give Reagan's mental state a belief that maybe she can be cured, or some sort of power of suggestion where she can be reversed through the exorcism. But obviously, as we learn, that she is really possessed, and the exorcism is not the power of suggestion, that they are really there to drive a demon out. And that's where Father Karras comes in. Now, up until this point, we cut back and forth between him and Chris's story, and we meet him and his mother, who's an old Greek woman who's sick and impoverished somewhat. He kind of lives a simple life. He works out at the track. He boxes. He's like a tough guy. He's a really cool character. You have this Catholic priest who has dedicated his life to God, to goodness, but he also has this tough fighting aspect to him, which really sets him up for the end. It sets him up as a believable character for his journey. But when he first meets Chris, he's skeptical because, as he says, exorcism hasn't been done. It's almost impossible to get approval from the church to do it. But as he meets Reagan, as he has some encounters with her, some horrible ones, he really starts to believe that this is a case of possession. And at the very least, even if it's not, we'll give him the ability to treat it like it is. And up until this point, Reagan has really descended into a grotesque creature, I guess. From the moment she started going to the hospital, where she started cursing, she started showing different personality traits, to her physical appearance slowly starting to degrade to the point where she has to just be kept in her bedroom from acting out in some horrific sequences. I really won't have to get into that. We all know what they are. But it's to the point where Chris was advised by the doctors to go seek an exorcism. So she sees Damien Karras, and this is where they come together, and now this is where we're at.
And they sent me to you. Now you're going to send me back to them? Jesus Christ, won't somebody help me?
You don't understand. Your daughter...
God, can't you help her? Just help her.
Another really cool aspect of this film is people really don't remember this, but it's around Halloween time, at least in the beginning. And to juxtapose Halloween 1978 with this, Halloween is not in your face. It's very simple. It's very subtle. It's a couple kids trick-or-treating down the street, and that's really all you get. I mean, how much more horror do you need in this film? Because that does set the tone for the season. You have that amazing sequence where Chris decides to walk home rather than take a ride, and you have the Tubular Bell soundtrack hitting, and she sees the kids trick-or-treating, she sees the nuns walking, and it's just really an awesome, simple sequence that feels very authentic. And let's not forget, this was also filmed in the 70s, and William Friedkin has a nice, beautiful eye for that specific style of filmmaking, and it's gritty. You have the zooms, you have the long shots, you have the long takes, you have the Veritas feel of the city, and just the way it's set up is really well done. And you can also see that in his other almost obscure film, Sorcerer. If you haven't seen Sorcerer, go watch Sorcerer, an amazing movie. Side note, just the filmmaking is very similar because it's from him, and he's got such a unique touch to it. But in The Exorcist, the cinematography and the directing is top notch. Anyhow, Karras is now working with Regan. He gets approval to do the exorcism, and they say, we don't want you doing it, but you can assist. Let's call Father Merrin in, the old guy from the beginning, the badass. So Merrin comes in, he meets with Chris right away, meets with Karras, and he's just rearing to go into the exorcism. He doesn't want to know the backstory. He doesn't want to know any of what Karras has picked up with because he knows what he's dealing with. He's done this before, and it's the same demon, obviously, that he had dealt with in a previous exorcism, because as there's a small scene where Regan, the voices within her, mention Father Karras, they mention the priest, they mention the father, so they know he's coming to confront him for this epic third act. So he shows up at the house. He, as I said, meets with Chris, meets with Karras, doesn't want to hear about anything that's going on. And there's this really interesting sequence where Father Karras says, so there's three voices. I've recorded three different personalities within Regan. And Father Karras says, there's only one. There's only one. And they're a liar. And he knows, and he's trying to set Karras up for what this is about to be. So there's a director's cut or an extended cut, and there's actually a small sequence in there that I'm thinking of now that is really beautiful. And I'm not sure why they took it out. I'm sure they had their reasons, but Father Merrin and Father Karras are going up the stairs. They had just prepared for the exorcism, and they're about to go conduct the ritual in Regan's room. And as they're going up, Father Merrin turns to Chris and says, "What's your daughter's middle name?" And she tells him, "Teresa." And he says, "That's a beautiful name." And he goes in. And it's just such a sweet moment because you have this mother, brilliantly played by Ellen Bernstein, who is in such grief and torment that she can't help her daughter, that he gives this small moment of light to her. And I think it establishes, I don't know what it was, to calm her, to kind of give an authority like, we have our stuff together, we're going to take care of it for you. I don't know, I just love that moment.
What is your daughter's middle name, Mrs. McNeil?
Teresa.
What a lovely name.
We are now back upstairs, and they're about to conduct the exorcism, and it's really moves quickly from here on out. Father Merrin does his best. He actually kicks Father Karras out because Karras is falling for the demon's lies, where he pretends it's his mother, and he's getting angry, so he kicks him out of the room to kind of go cool off. So Father Karras goes downstairs and sits down, and Merrin's in there, and he's getting weaker, and the demon and the devil, the possessed Regan, is really taking it to him, and you don't know if his heart could handle it, because he does have these pills that show us that he's older now, and he's kind of been weakened from his earlier days. So you have this awesome scene now where Father Karras and Chris are sitting there, and I don't know, the scene almost, it gives me chills and chokes me up thinking about it, because she turns to him and she says, "Is she going to die, Regan?" And you have this Father Karras, this character who's, I guess, somewhat struggled with his faith throughout the film, a little bit, who's kind of just been, down. He's dealing with his mother, and he's kind of down on life, but he looks at her, and he turns to her, and he says, "No." And he goes right upstairs, and he goes in, and that's when we find out that Merrin is now dead, and the possessed Regan's sitting there kind of laughing a little bit in like a creepy way, and he gets so angered, he starts beating I want to say Reagan, but the demon, and he's, take me, and this is his moment, and he finally gets up, and the demon is now in him. He's pulled it, he's drawn the demon, the devil, out of Reagan into himself, and now you see it in his face through the eyes and the makeup, and he's about to go strangle her, but then he finds the spirit and the God and the light in him to say no, and he screams it, and he jumps out the window and kills himself down the same flight of stairs that Burke died on. A really nasty, steep set of concrete stairs. And it's just a beautiful moment because now you have Reagan who's back and she's crying and you hear her voice and Chris hears her. And obviously Chris is unsure because this creature has been playing with her for the entire film. But she knows it's her daughter. She has that mother's instinct. She goes in there and she grabs her. And now you have Father Karras basically 90% dead on the bottom of the stairs, bloody. And he's grabbing his friend, his friend's hand, his friend who's another priest. And he's just squeezing it as he's getting told his last rites. And good has triumphed over evil, especially in this movie, which is a Catholic perspective. But I just love that battle. And light always triumphs over evil. And those are the best horror movies, and those are the best movies for me. I hate films that you want to kill yourself after, that are miserable, that have no out, where good does not win. And I know that sounds idealist, and I know a lot of people like films where they're different and they're well done and they're realistic and they're written to the point where that's how the story goes. But I want to see a film, especially now where I am in my life, that gives me hope at the end, especially with what you went through in that movie with some of those scenes. Whew. So we're at the end. Reagan's pretty much healed. She's got a couple scars, she's a little shell-shocked, and she meets the other priest, the one who was Damien Karras' friend, who gave him his last rites. And she's now leaving with her mom to go back home. So her story is now complete, and we have the priest and the detective walking off together discussing a movie to go see or something like that. And it's kind of a high note ending, and good has triumphed over evil. And the underlying idea of this film is I think that, God's love is true. No matter as bad as it gets, we have to turn to forces outside of our human understanding sometimes in life, through prayer, through faith, that we can conquer certain things. And I think that was present in the book, which I haven't read, confession, I would like to, but I think this was an amazing book film adaptation, especially in the 70s. I mean, we can talk about, let's talk about the performances for a moment. You have Linda Blair, who was unbelievable as Reagan. Some of the scenes she had to act out are stomach churning, and she sold it amazingly, whether she was Reagan or whether she was possessed Reagan. She really sold it. You really believed that this poor girl was going through absolute hell and trapped on the inside. And we did see that with the scene where, and I think this scene is what convinced Karras that this is actually what's happening, that there is a possession here, where you see the welts. They almost look like allergic welts on her stomach saying, help me. So Linda Blair, awesome.
You're gonna die up there.
Ellen Bernstein, what can I say? Her range was incredible. Her whole journey with the doctors, her frustration, the love she has for her daughter, the love she has for her job, how put together she is. It was a strong woman. And, once you really, really knew that Reagan was declining fast and the doctors had no answers, you can see the pain in her face, the grief, the thick glasses, the sunglasses, the hat, the bruises from when she was getting hit by her possessed daughter. And that moment that she finally reached out to Karras and was so desperate that she just wants him to help her daughter, that she has no idea what to do. She sold that beautifully. She's one of the greatest actors of all time, in my opinion.
You showed me Reagan's double. Same face, same voice, everything. And I'd know it wasn't Reagan. I'd know in my gut. I'm telling you that thing upstairs isn't my daughter. Now, I want you to tell me that you know for a fact that there's nothing wrong with my daughter except in her mind. You tell me you know for a fact that an exorcism wouldn't do any good. You tell me that!
And then, of course, you have, obviously, Jason Miller as Damien Karras, who's incredible. I mean, when I first saw this, when I was younger, I didn't realize years later that this was the same guy as the coach in Rudy, at least the first coach in that film. And he's had a ton of roles, but this is just I think his opus. He's incredible in this. He sells, like I said earlier, the tough guy priest who's flawed, who has issues, who's kind of lacking in faith, and his arc from that to hero is just amazing. So like, all the credit to Jason Miller. Like you really are one of the iconic horror movie heroes, film heroes, in my opinion.
If you're the devil, why not make the straps disappear?
That's much too vulgar display of power, Karis.
Where's Reagan?
In here with us.
Show me Reagan and I'll loosen one of the straps.
Can you help an old altar boy, Father?
Your mother's in here with us, Karis. Would you like to leave a message? I see that she can.
Those are the three big ones. You have the supporting actor of the detective who did a good job, the supporting actors of the priests and the hierarchy of the church that Karis has to meet with. You have Carl, the butler, I guess, of Chris McNeil, and he's really interesting. And you have that sequence where she isn't sure if he left the crucifix under the pillow, and she confronts him about that. He's the one who says there's no rats in the beginning, when she goes up into the attic, and that scene of like the flame blowing back, the real subtleness of evil leaving the attic now down into the house, into Reagan. Carl's always there as this presence. And Chris's assistant's really well. And then you have all the side characters, the director Burke, and they're just all so well done. And I think part of it is the 70s Veritas authentic filmmaking that really pulls out the authenticity of the characters as well. It was just a perfect storm of writing, story, cinematography, music, tubular bells, everything else, the score on top of it. It's a masterpiece in cinema. And it's got an uplifting ending, more or less. What else do we have about The Exorcist? As far as the horror goes, it's stomach churning. And I think that's necessary to really sell you the fact that this is not a girl who's mentally ill, who's sick, that she is possessed, and there's things you can't explain, whether it is the bed lifting off early on, whether it's her doing things she's never would have done, cursing, whether it's moving furniture, throwing things around, that whole scene where Chris runs in the room and she gets completely tormented and the crucifix. I don't want to go into it, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. The one I will mention is, and I had read something recently about this and I never picked up on this, when Reagan turns her head, or the demon turns Reagan's head, or the devil, and says to her, do you know what your daughter did? I guess someone picked up on that, and I'm not sure if the writers intended it, I think they did. She's talking about when Reagan pushed Burke out the window and his head was turned around on his fall through his injuries. The demon turns its head around and says, do you know what your daughter did? Kind of mocking the situation. And this demon really mocks and is intelligent. It's not just a creature of mindlessness. It knows what's happening. It's manipulating people. It acts like the holy water is affecting it, but it knows it's not holy water, and that's to get Father Karras to question whether it really is a possession. It's just totally manipulative, a very terrifying villain that is otherworldly, that obviously only a man of faith or men of faith could handle in a situation like this. And it's really cool that it's just, a actress and her daughter that get affected by this. They really have no ties to Father Merrin. They're really not spiritual people. They're not religious people. They're just a normal family in America doing their thing, and they just happen to have this happen to them. It's an incredible movie. So if you haven't seen The Exorcist, I highly recommend you go watch it, and don't go into it thinking, I want to watch a horror movie and I need to be scared. And if I'm not scared, which I don't know how you can't be scared, the dread and the tone and the flashes of the devil's face and just the buildup of the movie is completely dreadful. But I think people go into it thinking that they have to be scared. So nowadays, a lot of it is, oh, that's not scary. I think it's scary. But aside from that, elevate yourself above the horror and just appreciate this for a movie of good versus evil with incredible performances and incredible directing and just an overall incredible production. So with that, thank you for watching. I hope you check that movie out and look forward to more videos. And I think I'm going to watch tonight. For some reason, I've just been on a Halloween 4 kick. I don't know why, but we'll get into that.
Christ, commands you. God the Father commands you.